Welcome back. Now in today's video we're going to be looking at a basic introduction to structured query language, of course, which has data manipulation language, under which we have the select, insert, update and delete statements respectively, then closely followed by data definition language, which has the create, alter, drop and truncate respectively. Then of course we have the data control language, which has the grant and the revoke statements. And finally, we have the transaction control language, which has the save point, rollback, and commit statements respectively. Now, the core of SQL has to do with query languages, manipulating information or data to and from a base. Okay. Now, one of our major objectives here is we want to be skillful, learn how to connect PHP scripting language, programming language to SQL, the open source SQL, the MariaDB, and I need you to pay very close attention as we progress from stage to stage. Okay, so let's quickly go through MariaDB interface. And before you do that, ensure that your Xampp is running and it has, of course, Apache and SQL at the background actively in execution. So you select phpmyadmin, which houses MariaDB. Now quickly you see that the interface has several tabs, like the database tab where you have the list of databases. Then you have the SQL tab, which has the more like a command prompt where you can execute your SQL languages. Okay, the SQL syntax languages. You could actually basically your create, your insert, your update or delete here. In the status simply shows all the in and outgoing traffic to the SQL server. Of course, then you have the user account where you have your local host and the root and the likes. Then you also have the exports tab, which after you have worked on a specific DB and you want to transfer to an existing or a different disparate system, you can use that and then create an export in whatever format that you choose to. Okay, there are several formats here. You have array, you have CSV, you have open spreadsheets, and so on and so forth. Then over here in the imports, it's just the opposite of the export. You can actually import specifically in a pre-formatted template using the browse and look for the location and bring it within the interface. Then of course you have the settings. The settings has a list of functions like the import from tab, then import from browser, as well as the exports as well. Then the reset, then replication. The replication does some sort of server configuration that duplicates your existing database. Then the variables are server settings that are initiated in the config um, file of MariaDB or the SQL DB, okay, within the server environment. Then the character sets. The character sets have various options. You can choose ASCII, you can use CP, depending on what you specifically you're targeting. Okay, Latin and the likes. They're all the UTF-32 and the likes. Then we have the last one here. This one is just the more deals with the engines and the plugins. So let's quickly look at a brief way of getting used to the phpmyadmin SQL. Now in the first tab you have, as you already know, the database tab. Here we have the about 5 tables in question. We have the information, the MySQL, performance schema, phpmyadmin, test. Now in the second tab you have a specific interface that you can actually use to create a new table or a new database. So the first instruction you might want to enter here is say create database user, let's say user details. Okay, so we are simply telling the SQL to create user details. So once we're done with this, we come down here and we click on go. Yes, so you see my SQL returned an empty result with 0 rows. Yes, create user database user details, and that is it. It doesn't get any harder. Now if you check the list of your databases, we're going to discover that we have user details. Here it is, the very last one here, and this has no rows or tables, no information there, so we need to do that. So the next major thing we would love to do now is we're going to use this database. On our database tab, we're going to select our database and go to the SQL tab. Then we're going to attempt to create a table here, and the table structure or statements takes this form. It says create table user base with ID should be the first column. Int, normally you have to specify your type here. SQL has various types. You have int, and then you have variable character, and sometimes you could have text just like you have here. So we have about 3 columns. The ID is integer and is auto incrementing. Then the full name is text. The username is variable character with a capacity of 254 characters. The same thing with the password, PWDN, variable character of 255. Then the address is text, and the primary key, of course, is the ID, which is the very first one here. So once we're done with this, then we just go to the command here and run. Okay, so the SQL runs on the user details and created a table user base. Yes, SQL returned the empty result, meaning the instruction was perfectly carried out without any truncation or any error. And in order for us to check that, you simply go to the user details database and see that, of course, you have the user base. If you go to the structure structure will analyze the attributes of the table. As you can see here, the ID is int 52, then the full name here is text, then the username is variable character 25, just as we specified during the design. Okay, then the password is of course is variable character 255, then the address is text, as you can see here. Okay, so then if you go to the browse, you will not find any results. It's going to return an empty result. Yes, just like I said, because an empty result because there is no data in the database. So that's just about it. Okay, so having established our table user base on the DB named user details, the next thing we want to do is we want to attempt to insert into our defined table. So simply go to the tab, the SQL tab, and then you type in this insert into user base, uname, PWN, address. These 3 things are actually part of our variables, and we need to be very conscious of the structure, because here we have user full name, uname, then PWDN, which stands for the password, and the address. So if we are going to insert, we should sequentially skip it because this has been declared as the primary key, so we can't touch it, and it's auto increment. So if we're going to write a command in SQL, it should address the full name, the uname, the PWDN, and the address respectively. So we go back to the screen here, and then we simply write this up, construct this. This is insert into user base. Let's say full name. Full name should be here. Full name. Yeah, full name, because we have full name as our first column. Then, of course, the uname, the PWN, and the address respectively. So here we should also have, let's assume this is the full name. Then let's give this as Toby Michigan. Okay, as the username, and of course you put your comma sign. Password, okay, yes, it's password. And so let's run this and see how this what this will give us if the query will actually successfully execute or not. So we go here and we click on go. Okay, so you see that now one row has been inserted, and this is the SQL syntax that enables that. insert into user base full name, uname, PWN address, values, engineer to be where to be Michigan, password, Initial Ocean State. That is it. And if you check your browse tab now, you're simply going to see what we have inserted there. Okay. We initially inserted a record that we didn't truncate. If we wanted to start from 1, then we ensure that nothing has been inserted prior to this. So let's try and insert one more record and use the same syntax but alter the values. Let's say we call this Paulson viewer. Then say let's say Paulson view. Let's leave this as a password and let's just say this is British. Let's place this as Kenya. Okay, so and then we run this against the table. Okay, so we have another record inserted, and this is it. This is our second record here. Fortune Viber, Fortune U, password is password. It's PWDN, and we have the address as this. Okay, so this is just how simple it is to construct SQL inserts directly from the SQL interface, PHP MariaDB itself. Ensure that your braces, common mistakes that newcomers or new programmers do, or database administrators, is probably the braces, the curly braces, or rather the round braces. These round braces, if they are missing, you're going to get an error. Or if what you are calling, like this is a fixed column, the first column here is full name, then you have the uname and the PWN and the address. If you skip any of these, LHS for short must be equal to RHS. If any value you're calling from the right hand side is missing in the left hand side, then you're going to get an error. Okay, for instance, if I decide to clear this out now, and then let's say I run this, it's going to give an error, and this is the error it gives. It will say my SQL said column count does not match the value at row 1. Yeah, that is because the columns in this left hand side is not equal to the one in the right hand side. So whatever it is you are trying to equate, it's like a mathematical algebraic equation. Whatever you are having on your left hand side must be equivalent to your right hand side. Now we inserted 3, we're dealing with 4 columns, and then we have 3 here. The 3 here doesn't match up with the 4 that's here. Okay. By the way, we have the full name here, and then we have the username here, and the password there. But the address is missing. Okay, the address is missing. So, and because of that, we're going to need to ensure that these things are properly formatted in the right dimension, because if they are not, then it's very likely that there's going to be issues. Okay, so the next thing I want to put you guys through is how to run the update. Now that we've done our creation, we've created a database, we've created a table, we have seen how to insert using the command prompt interface here. Okay, so we know how to do that. Then of course, if you discover when you click on your browse tab, SQL automatically runs the select. It says select all. This is select all from user base. So if it is here, if anything it brings up quietly returns all the values in the database. Okay, as you can see here, we have the edit, and then we have the full name, the tabs, and everything that has to do with the database being displayed on the screen. So we have that. So now we want to alter. Let's try to do a quick update here. So let's return back to the SQL tab, and then you write a code that is of this nature. You see update user base, set PWA, that's the password now, to where user base ID is 2. Okay, now this is the update syntax, SQL syntax that actually does some sort of alteration or update. The previous password is password, but we want to change the password to just maybe a small alteration there, where specifies the location that the change should take place. Okay, so let's run this now and see what happens. Okay, so this has been executed. It says one row affected. We have now changed the ID 2, the column that matches this ID 2 to our password. So let's now browse and see the changes that have been made. Okay, password 2. So you see that now. So we've changed this row, the very first row here. We have changed, we've altered it. We just altered one of the columns there, and the column is this PWD. So when you're running an update, you must ensure that you specify specifically where you're making your alteration for. Otherwise, there's going to be issues, and you don't want to have. Now, the next thing we want to see in action is the delete. We already know that we have just 2 rows, okay, 2 and 3. So let's try and use this SQL tab here to run a delete query. This is the syntax of a delete. So delete from user base. User base, of course, let's not forget, is the table name. Now, where are we deleting from this? The indication of where, the location of where we are deleting from is here. The user base.id. That's the table name, okay, and the ID, where ID is equivalent to 3. So the moment we delete, we run this, the algorithm is simply going to go into the specific row that matches number 3, okay, with the ID 3. Let's run this now and see. So the system is acting as, the interface is acting as if you really want to delete from user base where user base ID is equal to 3. Yes, click OK. So you see that now it has deleted it, and the outlook is one row has been affected. If you go back to the browse now, the browse tab, you just see just one record there, and that's how simple it is to use a delete query. Okay, so the next thing we need to have a very good grasp at is the insert query syntax, or call it language as you may wish. Okay, now there are certain things we need to know. For the data manipulation syntax, we have the procedural aspect that does its insertion in this manner. It says that insert into column 1, column 2, column 3 to the nth column values. Let's say value 1 to the nth value. That is just the simple syntax for the insert. And you can also do the insert with respect to a table name, as you can see in the second row. Now, there's something that you need to understand here. Things have changed since PHP version 5.1. My SQLi insert query now comes with an object-oriented style, with respect to the PHP programming language. And what it simply does is that it connects with a variable and it initializes or instantiates. One of the features of object-oriented programming is instantiation, inheritance. And when you are calling a new instance of an object, you use the keyword new. As you can see in item 1, it says new MySQL to server to user to password and then to the SQL database in question. Now, the next thing there is it checks for the possible error using the PDO, the PHP data objects, to perform insert operation. Now, there's something we need to take note of here, and this is that PHP data object was introduced in version 5.1, so November of 2005, and the release candidate, introduced certain strong abstraction layer for persistent operations of SQL data manipulation languages such as insert, select, update, delete, etc. This is a very important theoretical concept that needs to be grasped. So let's now walk through PHP and SQL. We want to, for the first time, see how HTML, PHP script, and SQL treat tiered aspects of the web application. We want to put everything together. Now, the first thing we've done is that we've created a PHP MariaDB. I believe we don't want to go through all that rudimentary aspects again. Just create your project under the Eclipse platform, and then, of course, you create two files. I created two here. One is the one that will establish connection to the SQL, because when you're trying to establish connectivity between PHP script and SQL, you need a script. The script should, the first thing the script should do is try to make sure that there is an established connection, and then of course before you go to the insert query and select, delete, and the likes. So quickly, let's just put this code down here, which I've actually formatted to save our time. Now, the first thing is that you establish your variables. You already know your LHS and RHS. In this case, the RHS and LHS is mapping to a specific aspect of SQL. If you would recall, when I was putting you through this SQL, when we talked about privileges, the privileges, you have a certain group privileges, like this specific one does establishes the connection between this particular IP address. It's a locally born IP address that allows privileges. Now, the privileges are so many in SQL. You have, of course, to create, the alter, the index, the drop. You know, in your web servers, when you have on the internet, your host will actually create a kind of access for you to host your website. You don't want to go through that, but just know for the fact that once you're a root user, you add this specific address, which of course is a local host, you have access for all these attributes: selecting, inserting, updating, deleting files, and so on and so forth. Okay, so right here we have established connection to the local host, which is our SQL server. Now, the second aspect is the username. I really, this username can be anything of your choice. It's not necessarily it's the username that I use. I decided to use username. You could use anything you like. So the username here is root, which of course we saw in the interface here. The root, this is the root. Okay. Now for the password, you know, by default in most local systems, except if the web designer or rather the web database administrator has reasons to put a password. But for most of this tutorial, I didn't implement any password as such. Now the DB details. The DB details, we already have the DB details. The DB details is what we created earlier on, which is our user details. The name of the database is user details. Okay, and this is the user details. We have these user details here, and it has a user base table. Okay, and we just one row record here. If you click this, it will give us specifically our last, after we deleted the last record. This is the only thing that. So this is actually what we are working with: the user base, and then table, and then the database name, which is user details. So here our DB name is what user details, just as we designed in the interface, in the PHP MariaDB interface. So that is how we came about all these variables. Now, the second part of this code that establishes connection has to do with using another variable. This variable could be anything. You call the name as maybe CN or SL or anything you like, to ensure that this LHS connects with this. Now, for the first time, you're saying MySQL iConnect. MySQL iConnect is an embedded function for connecting, establishing connection between the hosts, the username, password, and the DB. So it's established, it used to be MySQL Select Statements, but right now the LI is the new way of connecting, establishing connection between PHP script and SQL. So just get to know that. So the third aspect here is using the if-else statement. Okay, now what this does is that it checks if the connection is successful with if selection. I already introduced you guys to if statements. We've talked a lot about if statements, so I'm not going to go over that in this tutorial. Okay, what I'm just going to explain to you is this. Now, if the bracket that opens here sets the condition. Now, this exclamation mark stands for not negative. Negative. Just establish that in your mind. Negative. It's checking if it is negative. And negative to what? Negative to this connection. If there is the negative connection, this should happen. Just like I taught you earlier on when we're dealing with the if else statement, with the grid marks A, B, C, so you can just click down below for the reference video. So here we're checking if this connection is not successful. What should it do? It should echo out cannot connect to what DB name. So if there's anything wrong with these variables here, this particular block of code will take center stage and give us an output. Okay, so now the second aspect or the last aspect of this code is the creation of the PHP else if, which is the second part of the if statement. Now, if it is positive, the exclamation is not in this space now, so this is positive. So if this connection is positive, it's actually existing, then this should be echoed out. Okay, echo this hosts. This, of course, I've explained to you earlier, has to do with space in HTML. You can also use it in PHP script. Now, this establishes a space between your words. Now, echo host space connected and space again. Now, here we have a kind of delimiter separator that separates our particular variable. This dot here separates out these standard constants. Okay, these are constants. A constant, like is a type of variable. It's a type of variable that doesn't change. I already said this earlier in the earlier videos. Now, so say echo connected and selected successfully. That's just about it. Now let's run this code and see the output. Okay, we run on server, of course. Okay, yes, we saved. Yeah, we run on the server. Let's see what it says now. Okay, so you see that now localhost connected and user details selected successfully. Okay, so we have successfully established our connection to the SQL. Now, if for any reason there is something wrong with this constant, let's assume I do something here and I not save and run, it's going to give us the alternate, which is cannot connect to what DB name. Let's run that now and see what it says. Okay. Yes. Okay, you see, my SQLite connect saying access denied for root and localhost. Some of you might have encountered this in your scripting, or those of us that know about some applications. You see, it's saying this specific error is actually telling us that my SQL connect access denied for roots at password. It's using password, so it's already telling you where the problem is coming from. And if you do not change this back, you just end up that if you're working with some applications that require there is standard industry and robust, little things like this can really set you off balance. So you need to be very, very careful if you are developing an app. So now that we have created our database connection and we've been able to establish connection from our PHP script to the SQL server, the next thing is to test an insert script. We're going to create an insert script such that this script will take whatever is coming from the form and take it to the database. Okay, now I have created a very simple template, just like I did previously, just to save our time. And I'm going to take you through the stages. There are about 7 major stages in this specific script. Now, in the first part, we have, as you can see here, we have stage 1. You start by making a valid reference to the DB connection. That is this DB connection, this specific connection here. Okay, now you include, this include is another type of PHP function that you can use to call up an existing script that's been written, so it inherits literally everything in the previous script. Like this, we are connecting this insert query script here by just including it and then encapsulating it with this string, this quotation, single quotation. Okay, now the stage 2 is entails including a message MSG string variable for dynamic messages. That's what this does. You're going to see that shortly. Then in stage 3, we carefully construct an algorithm that handles the incoming form variables. And how do we do that? We've already seen this kind of thing in our previous video, where we constructed a string or variables coming from the form to be handled by PHP script and processed. Okay, you can refer to those scripts as a reference guide. Now in this case, we have if is set post submit, and then which leads us to stage 4. Stage 4 captures the form names into the post variables. This is what is happening here. You have LHS and then you have RHS. For the LHS, take LHS as the incoming, okay, and then take RHS here as this particular aspect away, the right hand side to the equality sign. You can take that this side of this equation or this variable as the outgoing. Okay, this is incoming, this is outgoing, and then you have the username as well as incoming, and this is outgoing. It's outgoing to a place, to a destination, and the destination is going to is the database. Okay, the same thing goes with the password variable and then the address. Now in stage 5, we have you make use of the SQL statement, the select statement, for checking possible usernames that is already existing in database, because without this stage 5, anything going in from, you're trying to insert from the form to the database, will be duplicated. So what this simple algorithm does now is that it checks by connecting and selecting all the usernames in the database that matches the incoming. Okay, the incoming here, that is the uname here, it checks this. So if this is the same as this, the script is going to execute this algorithm and say, okay, my SQL number rows. Now let me talk a little bit about my SQL number rows. My SQL number rows is one of the functions of SQL in PHP you use to count if a record set exists, if data exists, a variable that is incoming exists already in the database. That's one of the very useful features of MySQL number rows. After we have done the SQL statements, the next thing is to now check it by SQL num rows. Okay, now number rows is acting as a function with the arguments of this select check. Okay, I hope you're getting it. If you don't, just play back the video and then you will understand how this thing goes. Now the next stage, which of course is still stage 5 here, is using the if exists. Now you've encountered the if already. This if exists simply checks if this record, the number rows, finds an existing record that is at least 1 equals to 1. We don't want greater than 1 because that might mean some other thing. We want it to be equal to 1. Once there is a record that is equivalent to 1, now the next part of the algorithm is that we're telling the algorithm that it should exit with a message. And what is the message? The message now, this dynamic message that we declared earlier on, comes into play here in stage 2. So this message is immediately dynamically assigned this output that username exists in the database, and the script will terminate and stop running. Let's move on to step 6. Now in step 6 or stage 6, we have alternate events with the else program feature that takes the data from the insert query and processes it to the database. We use the else program structure here to alternate between this specific if here, yes, the initial if here, which checks the user exists, if the user exists. So the alternate to the if now here is once there is no user that is bearing the same username, then this will take place. Else the SQL will run its own query here, insert into user base all the variables in the columns, and then the incoming, these are the post variables. These variables you are seeing here are the ones that are up here in the left hand side. Okay, they are also in the form. If you go down below in the form, HTML form. Okay, so once that is done, the SQL query carries out an execution, a function on the variables. Now when you're using MySQLi, ensure that you refer to this connection. This connection is the connection we have in the SQL script here. This connection we initially made. Okay, so we are also still referring to it because this is how SQLi query works. Whenever you're using MySQLi query, you must refer to your connection, your active connection, database connection, and the variable query, the insert query. This is the variable storing our insert query, the SQL insert. As you can see, SQL query insert, SQL underscore insert here is the same thing as SQL insert. So now we move to stage 7. In stage 7, we repeat the steps earlier that we did in the SQL script. Yes, what are the steps we did? We simply just checked if we did not with the exclamation. The exclamation sign shows if it is negative, and without it if it is positive. Okay, so now if it is negative, if this SQL query, the one we're trying to insert, if there's a problem somewhere, then the message should be what? Cannot insert record. And after we put that string there, we now put a function to nicely tell us where the error is coming from. There you go. Then we move to another segment of this code on stage 7, which now tests else if, the opposite of the not, the negative. This is now positive. So if there is no problem with the insert, this will now take place. The SQL will take place, and then the message will be outputted as record inserted. So then the rest of the code are things that I believe everyone that has been following this tutorial is aware of. Constructing your HTML, and then the only new thing here is that here we have a PHP echo message. Okay, so this is a dynamic message that has been declared. This MSG is a string, one of the stage 2, where we declared the message. So all the messages we are outputting will be coming out here. And then in the form, now observe that this HTML here is, this is a way to make comments in HTML nicely. If you've coded in XML in Android also follows this pattern of commenting its XML asset files. Now ensure there is consistency, especially with the form action. What this is just saying is a guide that whatever you are having here as a name, like this ID, the input name here, and then the input name here must correspond. This must correspond. It must correspond between this and all this here. And of course, we shouldn't forget the database too, because the database has these names and there has to be corresponding. If you are having a lowercase here as F, and in your script you're having an upper script, you're going to be having issues. It's going to be giving you errors. Okay, so let's quickly run this script now and see how it goes. But before we do, let's check what we have in the database. Okay, in the database now we have all this. We have about 3 rows. Yeah, we have 3 rows. They will just refresh the page now. We have 3 rows. Now let's see if the script can actually give us a new record. Okay, we come here and we say run, and then run on server. Okay, and we save. Yeah, now of course if you're going to run, make sure you're running on your existing server as usual. We're not going to go through those elements. The earlier videos has given us an insight into how to do that. So let's test some data and see how this application will execute. Let's give this a name if Ishara and then let's just give this a simple username or MO, okay, and then the password you can just paste anything here. And let's give this Western away Lagos. Okay, now if you submit this, let's run this and see. Okay, username exists in the database. Please choose another username. No, this is not supposed to be the output. We need to check back our script. I think the issue is emanating from this stage 5. There's something here that needs to be corrected, and I think it's here. Okay, it's right here. This is supposed to be equals to. Okay, so this is supposed to check for equivalence from LHS to RHS. Okay, user exists, yes. So let's test this again now. Run. We try, yes. Username exists in the database. Choose another. We've not saved. We need to save this. Once you make corrections, you have to save. Okay, let's retry this now. Let's retry. Okay, now it's working. New record inserted. Let's check our database and refresh. Okay, there we go. You see that now? So we have our new record here, our new row. And just ignore this ID that is duplicated or that is skipping. There's been some deletions. I actually made some deletions. Whenever you delete from a record set that has an auto increment, it will skip to the next integer. So let's try and insert something else now. Now we've seen that, or let's try and reinsert this username now and see if the system or the application will accept it. Okay, so let's say we will run what we initially placed. Okay, we try. Okay, so you see that now fee is not being taken again because fee is already existing. That is why it's telling us that the username exists in the database. Please choose another username. That is exactly what is going on here now, because the message here says if the user exists, if there is a flag, this flag executes such that when the algorithm checks, just like what I explained earlier, if it checks where this name, the database name, is the same as the incoming from the post form or from the form post, then this specific message should be outputted, and that's exactly what the algorithm is doing here, because fee exists. So except if we decide to use something else here, that is where this will go. Now if you change this to 2, you discover that, and you run let's just keep the rest of the variables the same. If you run it now, it will go, and the reason why it goes is inserted is because you simply change the username. Let's refresh the database now. Okay, we simply change this to phpmyadmin. Assuming we maintain this username here, the name here, the algorithm will reject it, the application will exit. And that's where you see that if you say you refresh this now and you try with the same data that was previously posted with the same username, it's going to exit. And the exit runs once you see this. nothing happens again. The program truncates at that point. So this is just about all it takes to design or structure up a typical insert query using PHP. Alright, the next thing we're going to do now is that we're going to try out the PHP data updates. So let's take a quick look at how to implement PDO in PHP with respect to the insert query, SQL insert query, by the way. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take this code, the initial code we developed for the procedural aspect, and then we'll modify it for the PDO. Yeah, here we go. So here we have the first aspect, which establishes our variables: the host, the username, the password, the DB name, all related to the SQL PHP MariaDB. Then secondly, of course, we now establish connection, the SQL connection. Okay, and this is the pattern that it follows. Connection variable is declared, and you have new SQLi, host, username, password, and DB, just as we have previously. But the only difference now is that we are calling it an object, my SQLi object, okay, or function as you would put it. Now I'll be making a full video on classes and objects, and I believe you'll find it in the description below. So this is new. The word new is used to instantiate an object in programming generally. Okay, so I believe from the looks of this PDO, we're looking at MySQL as an object. Okay, and then it's mapped out as part of its properties, variables, properties and functions is host, username, password, and DB name. This is just an assumption, okay? And what this really does is that it makes coding much more shorter. When you code with PDO, the length of code you code is lesser and much more precise. If you refer back to the previous code, you see that this one has a longer code for the procedural, but for the PDO it's shorter. It's obviously, so just taking a gauge of it from your eyes, you discover that there's less code here. Now the last thing to do here is we initiate the connection now with the connect error function. Connection here previously in the second stage has been instantiated. Now in the third aspect, it is now in active use as the main SQLi object being referred to. Now, and the connection is being mapped to the connect error. So if there's an error, something is going to come up. This is going to execute. This specific aspect of the code will be executed, and then the error, the source of the error will be nicely outputted to the screen. Let's try and run this now and see how it executes on server. Okay, so that's it. So the output is blank. If there is an error, it will have outputted it here. You would have seen it right in the middle of the body. Okay, if you for any reason have any misinformation and you try to run the script again, probably you put a password where you're not supposed to put it, and then you run the script, it's going to generate an error. Yes, you see that now. It's giving you a warning, and then it's also telling you where the warning is coming from. Access denied for user root at the server Eclipse DBSQL PL. It's telling you specifically where it is coming from, line 9, which of course is the aspect, this place here that we just modify the password. If you remove the password and of course save the script, then go back and then run the script again, everything goes back to normal. So that's just how simple it is. Now quickly, I'm going to also take you guys through connecting SQL. Previously we had the SQL. I told you, I took you guys through going through stages, the stage 1 all the way to stage 7. Now I've created another script, but now based on PDO, because the first one is based on the procedural aspect or perspective. So right here now we have the PDO, and the PDO is just 6 steps. It truncates at the 6th step, step 6. Now let me quickly walk you guys through it. Now, as you all know, we create an include. The include now includes the connect SQL PDO file, which is different from the procedural. This one is the procedural, and this one is the object-oriented approach. And that is what we're including in the insert query PDO script that we've created now. And then, of course, we still have our message. You know what the message does. And then you still have our, in stage 3, we've also maintaining this. This is still very relevant. The only difference here, then of course, the stage 5 too still exists, checking if there is an existing username. Then over here, we have a modified way of doing this. This is still the same, but what changes is this. This is the object-oriented style of PDO. Look at it. It says if connection query, that's the function. The object is mapping to a function here. Object function argument. The argument is the SQL insert. This variable here that has been given, which of course should return true. If it returns true, then the message will be executed. The message that we spoke of earlier. You know, the only thing is that it had to give a new message that says new PHP data object based record inserted to our SQL database. Okay, then else is now just a simple echo with an error SQL and a break. Then the connection error, the source of the connection error, will be outputted just like they did in the database connection for PDO. So then finally the connection closes. Every other thing remains the same. There's no difference. So the major thing to just implement here is this specific aspect of this particular area here, this if con, this if place that establishes a fresh way of using object-oriented style in executing insert. Let's quickly run this video now and see how pretty much it will run. And from what I see, it should give us exactly what I think we should just use this as a permanent server, the local host. Yes, so we'll save ourselves some time. Now let's try a new information here. Let's call this John Smith, and you space that. Then here let's put John underscore S Smith. Right, so you can just put any password. Let's say Berkeley, Antonio, USA. USA, yeah, of course. Now let's submit this and see what it says. Okay, now so this execution is successful. As you can see, it says new PHP data update base record inserted to SQL database. Let's quickly check that and see what it gives. Refresh our database list. Okay, so you can see John Smith here, or John, or just that's a typo there. John Smith. Okay, John Smith underscore Smith is the username, of course. Then you have a random password and address. Okay, now if you flip back to this script and you try to reinsert that record again, you see now it's going to give you username exists in the database. Please choose another username. So successfully now we've been able to see how to insert procedurally, if that is correct, and also in an object-oriented style. Now, please, if you've not been through the video of classes and objects, I need you to go through that, because that is where you actually change your skill in programming PHP. And believe you me, a lot of jobs are still out there being advertised. If you're a computer science graduate out there, or you are a passionate programmer, you might not necessarily have a degree. Just ensure you have these skills, and then before you know it, you could just land yourself a very fantastic job that will pay your PMs and things. But before then, you need to pay the price, and this is the price, knowing the basics, the principles, and the pragmatic approach. Okay, so now the next thing that I would love us to do is the insert query with PHP data objects. Now, these has also been arranged in stages, and there is need for you to take a very close look. If it is possible, you should have a writing pad and a pen to take notes as we go along this code. Now, in the first stage here, we include the PHP connection that houses the objects or the variables for the PDO connection. Okay, now in case you forgot about that, this is what it looks like. The PDO connection has for the LI, MySQLi, this is for MySQLi. Then there is another one for the proper, yeah, I think this is it here. Okay, it's actually not, this one is for the MySQLi, so we're not going to need this. This is what we're working with. This is a typical script that connects to MySQL using the PDO pattern. Okay, now the first thing is to establish the connection, the host, the user, the password, and of course the DB name. The DB name, as you all know, is user details, which we'll be working all along with. Now, secondly, we're going to use a sort of try-catch block. Okay, try-catch block was first introduced, as far as I know, with Java. Java is very common with try-catch block. It was used as an exception for tracking errors and the likes. Now it has been integrated into PHP. That's why PHP still holds a very huge relevance in the open source and object-oriented computer software applications industry. Okay, so now we have the try here. The try has the first statement here, which says con. There's a variable that is declared here. Then we have new, then new PDO. New PDO, of course, is instantiating an instance of the PHP data objects. That's what this is doing. Then over here we have the driver. That's the MySQL driver. The driver could be anything else. It could be Postgre. It could be whichever. It could be Microsoft or the likes. Now the next thing to that is the host. This is the host, the local host. That's what we're dealing with. Then the DB name. Of course, the DB name is been declared here. Okay. Then we have the SQL user. The SQL user is this user, the user root that connects to the database. Then the password. Yes, this covers the password here. All right. So now the next thing is to use a mapping. Now that the connection variable that has initialized or instantiated the PDO object is carrying all the properties and methods of this object, so we can now use it as if it is actually the PDO itself. And this is mapping to a method called set attribute with this argument, set of arguments. These are arguments. You have PDO attribute, error mode, and the error mode exception. Okay, attribution is actually what like these things that are connecting to that are relating to the object itself. Okay, and then the error exception is this, the catch. Okay, so this is the first block it's going to try to execute. Okay, and then it will echo successfully here. Now the next part of the code is that it's going to catch if there is an exception. Should there be an exception, then connection will be filled and the error message will be generated based on this particular method, the catch method. Okay, which of course is still part of the PDO. So that is just about that for connecting PHP data objects, with the help of SQL. So let's flip through now the actual insert query. Now the insert query for PDO is similar to the MySQL or the procedural, but it's just that it uses more of methods and objects and methods to carry out specific tasks. Now you will understand this as we get along. Okay, so the first, like I said, includes the connection to the PDO, and then you have a message here that is initialized for dynamic periodic messages that might be needful. Now the stage 3 involves what you already know. This is a set. The set specifically focuses on these variables: full name, the uname, the PWDN, which you already know, and the address. This is LHS, RHS. I've already explained this in the previous part of the videos. Okay, now the next thing here is the SQL Select Statement. Now, and SQL Select Statement carries out its PDO activity by using a sort of check. Okay, this is the check rather. Sorry, let's not get ourselves confused. This is the check. This is the check. This one checks if there's an existing username. Okay, this is the stage 5. It's the same stage 5 we used previously. Okay, now this is where the PDO actually takes place. Now, this stage 6 performs alternate events with else structure to perform incoming data. Now, let me just briefly explain this. This is an else. We have an if here. If user exists, then there will be a user exists output for the message. Else, it's a continuation of stage 5. Else, SQL insert into user base, full name, uname. These are the variables in the actual table on the database. Now the values of course are at the receiving end. This is the outgoings, the incoming, like I explained previously. So now this is where the PDO actually happens. It says if connection, okay, query, this is a method. This is already the connection. The connection in the PDO proper. This specific connection is what it's referring to. And what makes it inherited is because we've included it up here in this area here. Okay, so here it is actually being used as an active object that can call the PDO method called query. Okay, so we now have SQL insert. It's referring to this particular statement here. It says if it is true, then a message should be, this is the message that will be outputted. New PHP data object base record inserted into database. Okay, then there's another else there, else echo error. If an error exists, then this will take center stage. Okay, so now you must understand the sequence here. This is very the key. This stage 6 is the very close the summary or the active summary of this particular part of tutorial. You must understand it just the way I explained it. Okay, this is the instanced object, the PDO object that maps to the query method or function with the query argument, statement argument. That is this particular SQL statement here, this specific one here. It is executing a specific function or method, or this is the argument that is supplied to this particular method called query. So if it is true, is it not true or false? If it is true, a message will now be generated in PDO based object. Record is inserted. Okay, right. So then finally the connection closes. The rest of the code is something that we're all familiar with: the HTML, the PHP insert script, the PDO, the message, and then of course ensure that there is consistency with the form action. That is the names here in the input here. All these have to be consistent with what is up here, what has been declared up here, or what's being treated. Okay, there has to be consistency in this. Left hand side and the right hand side. This is the left hand side, this is the right hand side. Alright, so the next thing now is that we're going to run the script and see what it does in active application. So it's up. I'm going to test it now with a simple just random names. Let's just call this random, and then we have username, say random, yeah. Then we have our password. Let's just put anything here. Then here let's put this as Oju Eleba roundabout Surulere, Lagos, Nigeria. So then we submit. Yes. Okay, so we can see this now. New PHP data object record is 72 SQL database. In order to cross-check that, we're going to now go to the actual PHP MariaDB and see if actually this has been done. Okay, the message has given us what is okay. Now you see that now, so we see that random has been inserted with random as username, then of course this random password and the random address, and that's just about it. It doesn't get any harder. You just need to be persistent and you know, gradually you become an expert software engineer. Now, the next thing I would love us to take note of is the SQL Select Statement. This happens to be one of the most popular part of SQL due to the fact that it helps programmers and database administrators to retrieve stored information. You could call it stored procedures and triggers from the database to the user. And it takes various forms such as select column names from table ID, then select all from table ID, select all from table ID where certain conditions exist, and clauses that can be used include but not limited to order by, distinct, ascending, descending, group by, and so on and so forth. Now, for the PDO aspect of PHP, a variable is declared as an instance of the PDO object, which now maps a function back to the object, selecting all the information from the database to the user. We're going to see practical ways of implementing this concept shortly. So the next thing we would want to do now is to see how select statement can be used. Now we're going to use our previous template because we have some structure designed on ground, and based on that we're going to work on PHP select and see how to actually work on that. Now these are the steps needed to design a statement, a select statement, such that all the records in the database will be displayed. Now the first step is that first things first, you need to include SQL, the SQL that has the connection. We are using the previous one that we used. Okay, so that being said, this houses all the information we need to connect to the SQL itself. This very file here. And then once we're done with it, the next step, of course, you design your HTML that has the head and all the tags, as you already know. Then successively we're going to go now and create an SQL select query variable using the string and call the query function. Okay, this is actually the select query string, variable string, and this does the query on the string itself. Now step 3, alternatively we should establish a variable that will hold all the number of records in the SQL base. Yes, this does this successfully. Yes, it does this because we declare a variable called number, and then we assign my SQL number rows. This is another function in PHP that helps to find out the number of records in a database. Now the fourth step involves just declaring a singular variable that will serve as a serial number to the SQL record set. You'll be seeing the use of this shortly. Now the next step is that we're going to utilize the selection program structure using if to analyze the information coming in. If it is true, just like what we did previously, if it is true, if this data is true, the data is referring to here is this data. If the connection query, if the SQL query is true, or if it is not true, rather, because once the exclamation mark is before the variable, then we are negating, we are checking the negation, the negative aspect of that specific execution. So we are asking it now to kill itself, to not to execute. That's what this stands for, and to output an error nicely. Now, following this is the HTML table that will hold the record sets. Okay, so this is just a simple table with about 1 2 3 4 5 uh, table um, columns. These are columns. Okay, now beneath that we have a structured combination of if and do loop. The if and do loop, what it does is that it takes all the information in this array, which of course is one of the functions in PHP that helps to analyze data from SQL, to and from SQL. So he's saying that if the data set is actually existing and the query is successful, then this loop will take place. The loop will repeat this all the queries one by one, row by row. After it completes the first one, it will go to the second one. Now, if you recall, in previously when we did do loop is one of the loops in PHP that actually helps to process information until the condition that requires it terminates. Okay, so and now very close to that, we have these numbers and these data sets. This is how to call a data set. You're calling a data set full name, uname, pwdn, address, because these are the variables you have in a database that we want to display. Okay, and then the data set is the array, is actually the common program structure that holds all those variables in a single name, in a specifically single name. Now, the next and final thing is to increment the initial factor for each of the row displays, which this does. Once it completes one, this will increment the counter to the next number integer. And finally, we now apply the loop program structure to progress or process the data while the record set is still active. So the next thing we want to do right now is that let's just run the script on the browser and test to see the output. Quickly, we just click this and run on the server. Let's see the output. Of course, yes, we want to save. Okay, so this is it. This is the output. Now, take a very close look at the serial number. The serial number, what is executing the serial number is the n. That's this n here. The initial n that we declared here, somewhere in the code. Yeah, this n here. That is the value you're seeing that is executed here. Meanwhile, the second row is the full name. The full name is what enables us to display the full name, is simply this specific aspect of the code, the algorithm that captures the full name and matches it up to the label, because this very one here in the step 6 are just referred to them as labels. They are simple labels that actually hold the reference of what is coming from the database. All this is coming from the database. Okay, so and except for this, the very first row. In the first row is just a label that is incremented from the algorithm itself. Okay, so with that said, we have successfully used a select statement to bring out, this is it, this is exactly what helped us to do this. Select all from user base. The user base is a table on user details. User details is the actual table, or rather it's the actual database that we're using, that is resting on. So if all the necessary variables to use are not in place, like if you don't have the data DB name that is corresponding to the table you're referencing, that might be an issue. So I would advise practice more and see how you can tweak things. Okay, so the next thing is that we want to see how PHP data objects can help us to select all the records in the database. Now, we're going to be needing this definitely. Our PDO that establishes connection from the PHP script to the SQL. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to make a draft, and most of the codes here are codes we've seen before. We're just tweaking one or two things to create a new method or function narrative. Right. The first thing is you include your PDO proper, the one that houses your PDO script, the script that connects to SQL, the PDO method. Now the next thing is drafting a default or template for HTML. When you, of course, don't have to go through that. You have the head, the meta, and the likes. Then you have the title. The only thing you should do is ensure that your title reflects what you're doing, so you can know, you can identify your script and you don't get confused along the way. So let's move on. Now the next thing here is that we initialize an integer called n, purposes of serial number column views, and that is this here. Next, step 3, select. We create a variable name in PHP that holds and assigns the statement, the SQL statements. Alright, now the next thing, we now create another variable called data list, okay, that now maps to what? The PDO connection. That is this PDO here, this specific PDO, the PDO here, that is this is the instance, the new PDO. This CON holds a new object that connects with SQL attributes and the likes, okay, and establishes connection. So that is what is being referenced here, connection, and it's now assuming the position of PDO, the instance of PDO. It's just like saying your father, you have a son, your son is now your instance is representing you. So take this as the son and this one as the father. PDO is the father, biological father, while connection is the biological son. And of course, every son inherits from the father. So now here we have the new son inheriting a method from the father, okay, and one of the methods of the father now is what? Query. The argument of what? Selection. This selection, the previous one is step 3, that holds our new statement, the SQL statement. So this specific area now captures the PDO in operation for select. Every other thing is the same. Step 5 is just echoing out, is bringing out tables. These are labels to act as the top, okay, to be labels for identifying what is beneath it, which is coming from the database. And step 6 houses a for each. The for each now takes data list as row. I've already gone through for each. I believe you all know what for each does now, because we gave quite a number of examples previously. For each now in this case takes data set, this specific data set, as row, and outputs it in individual rows as a complete data set, plus our n, and n has served as what? The serial number. And then finally we echo the table. Let's now run this and see how this would appear to us on the browser. Run on server. Yeah. Okay. Yes. SQL server connected successfully. Then of course we have the list. This serial number is n. N at 1 and it becomes 2. At 1 becomes 3, and so on and so forth. Full name is the first column in our database or table. Yes, database table, the table on the database. And the username is here, it's the third column. And then you have the password for the fourth, and then the address for the fifth. So that's just about it.
Okay, so let's quickly look at the update query, and it takes this format. We say update table ID, set columns as value 1, column 2 as value 2, all the way to the nth column that also equals a value of an nth range. Then for the PHP update, we have a variable that holds the instantiation of the DB object, or probably the object that prepares the function, which of course executes the actual query and returns back the value. Over here, what we're going to do now is we're going to actually see how to use MySQLi to update. Okay, and for a start, we should understand that our first point of call is the script that holds all our variables to the SQL. You mustn't, this cannot be emphasized. And we have a framework already that we've designed that's going to help us to achieve our update. Now, let's go to the update. Now, in the update script, we have similar code that houses similar tools you've been using from the beginning. Okay, first we have the SQL Connect, the script that includes the connection. The SQL Connect, this connection, as previously referred to, okay, referenced. Now, this is it here, the connect SQL, and our active connection variable that uses MySQL Connect is CON. Right. Now, the next thing is the message. This message is a common message you've been using as a variable for dynamic messages that will be updating us on the event procedures. Okay. Now, stage 3. We use our select, we declare select existing to actually find out if there is something that is existing in the database that is incomplete. This select existing actually is a variable I named for purposes of saying we're actually selecting existing data from the user details on the user base, database. Yeah, select existing, like saying select table, okay, from user base. That's our table is user base, and we are calling it with respect to the database called user details. Okay, so that is what this does. My SQLi query, as you already know, establishes connection. It has two arguments. It's a method in PHP used for connecting and selecting, because you need to call these two variables before it becomes a valid variable for executing SQL statements. Okay, you declare a variable, it could be any name, then you map it or equalize it to the MySQL query function, which has two arguments. One, the connection string. Second, the parameter, the SQL statement that you're executing. Okay, that's what that does. Now, the next thing is checking if this particular statement is valid. If it is not valid, which of course the exclamation mark does, a message is outputted, cannot establish connection to SQL base. Then a nice looking error comes out with respect to MySQL. Now, the next thing is that we are alternating the if with else. Else row should be equivalent to MySQL fetch array. I already mentioned this earlier. This is an inbuilt PHP function that helps to process out all the datasets in a singular array. Okay, I've already taught you guys about arrays. Arrays initialize at 0. Their first number is always 0. It can go to maybe to the nth value. Okay, so this MySQLi create and fetch array is an array that traps all the database and fits into an array like structure. Okay, now we are now naming this specific array row. Okay, now MySQL fetch array houses you must supply at least one argument, has one bracket for argument, and the argument must be the query itself. And in respect to what we are doing now, the query is select existing. That's why we have this here. Now the ID, of course, is the ID you have in the database, then you have the full name, then you have the uname, and then so on and so forth. Now these are just prerequisites
Following this is step 6. Step 6 now handles the update button. If the update button is pressed, that is what it stands for. This should happen. Now we'll now begin to take stage 7, which now takes cognizance of the IDs, all the variables in the form input, input ID, input full name, input name, input password and address. Now this is followed by stage 8, which actually does the SQL execution. This is the statement. Now I named this update SQL base and equalized it to my SQLite query. Okay, the same query that did this here, that did the select here. You can see select existing here. You can see my SQLite query, con, and then select from username. It has 2 arguments, like I said previously. The same thing with the update here. Now we're trying to execute update, so definitely we're going to need the same similar thing. The connection, this connection here, and then this statement. This is the statement. Notice the way the statement is. We open a bracket. If you make any mistake on the indents or maybe the brackets, you're going to have error. So we have to be very careful. You can see here, this is one large bracket that holds this. There's another one interior embedded that holds the statement itself. Okay, and see the way ID is referenced here. If there's any mistake here, you might just be stuck up with an issue. So take very close look at how this is being constructed. The entire string here, all the way from here down to here. You must take very close cognizance of it. Okay. Now the update is updating in this structure. We have update user base set full name, uname, pwn, pwn, and then this. So each of these is mapping. This is from the database. This is from the form. Okay, LHS, RHS, as you already know. Now, this is the next stage. The next stage here involves just checking if this is true. If this executes true. All right. So here we see if this is not true, then this will be outputted. The message, there will be an exit function call, and then the message will now say cannot perform update with reference to where the error is coming from. Okay, so the next thing is else. We initialize with else, and the else stage is like this. You see message, of course, SQL updated. That's our dynamic message. Then of course we now bring out all the existing variables as well. Now if you go into, so the last part of the script that helps with the update is just this HTML. Like we all know, this aspect is quite easy to comprehend. You have your usual template for HTML, then the table. Of course, we have the PHP that outputs the dynamic messages. Then we have the consistency, of course, that has to be there for all the names and variables. Now, the very close thing I want to also talk about here is this input. Now, if you look at this input here, we have input full name, type as text, value as this. There's a way you use value. This value is one of the methods of the input methods under the form object. Okay, in HTML, usually you have your name, then you have the type. The type specifies the the kind of data that is incoming. Now the value in this case outputs what is existing in the database, and that is why in the beginning of the script we did this. We called up a select statement. Okay, and this is a select statement that selects out the existing of the database such that all the information is stored up in a specific variable. This handles that. That's prior to the submit button. That is when you come to the update script, the updates will have
already established data that is in the database. So this script simply tells SQL to draw out the initial values. It is when you now click on the update button, this submit button here, this very submit button here, as you can see that the name is update, and that is why if you go up to the script here, it says if it set updates here, if it set updates, the name being referred to here is update. So this captures the event procedure that, okay, I want to update the information in the database. Then all this will now take place. All these are holidays up to this level take place. So this is just about how easy it is to run an update in PHP with the help of SQL. So finally, let's run the script and see what it does on the browser. Okay, you can see this now. Now we have this name existing. We have a full name, we have the username. Assuming I wanted to make changes here, let's say click or delete this value here. Okay, then I select on submit. Okay, so you see that now this now opens SQL database updated. And if you go back to the browser and you refresh, you see that you see now we have the change has occurred. We changed the username and it has reflected with the help of our script here. So this is just about all that you need to do as far as update script is concerned. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at using this same script, the PDO version or pattern, to update data in the database. Now we definitely need the PHP proper, which of course uses the method of PDO for connecting. This is still going to be very useful. Now in the update script, it's very similar to the procedural one which we just saw, and the variables needed are also similar. Like for instance, in the stage 1, you definitely need to include your PDO. This PDO here, the one that outlines the hosts and the users and the parameters needed to connect to 3306, which is the SQL MariaDB data source. Then, of course, you need your message, as we've always known that to do so far in this tutorial. Then, of course, this we will need to select this definitely, because this actually captures the data from the data set in the database. Okay, now then the only thing is that here we're now using, of course, we're still using the pattern, the same pattern that follows SQL Select. Okay, now if this is not correct, this is also, we just change the variable here, because previously it had a different name, but here now it's data set, and this aspect actually checks if this is true. Okay, and if it is not true, then this message is outputted. Okay, following this is the else. The else now, of course, does the usual thing it does to in the procedural method or perspective. And then we now have the button. This specific area here handles the submit button of the update. Okay, all other variables are the same, just like the procedural, with the exception of this. This area actually captures the entire operation in a PDO, PHP data update style. Okay, the first here is the statement to the SQL. The second here is the one that uses a variable that is equivalent to con, and the con is the connection string here, the PDO, that inherits all the PDO features. Okay, then that is mapped out to a method called prepare. There are several methods in PDO. This is just one of them. Okay, so this is prepare update SQL base. All right, then here we have update PDO execute. This is another method under the PDO, because PDO has several methods. We have seen prepare, we have seen execute. All right, there's also fetch all, but in this case we're using just the prepare and execute. The prepare does the query itself, and then the update, the object, the instance of the PDO does the execute. It has execute, so this is another method or function. So finally, we now check if this execution is successful, and if it's not, it will output this message. Then here is the actual update. Once the update is complete, then this else section will now, I implemented a sequence or selection here. This selection does a simple thing. It checks if the execution here is successful. So as you can see, it's the same, virtually the same code here. Okay, if at update this, that is this, if this is successful, then message should now be what? Update row count. It will happen. This row count is one of the methods too in another method in PDO object that captures the entire rows that has been updated to the browser or to the user. Now, for each, as we saw previously, for each now, takes this data set, this specific data set that we declared up here. There, yeah, the data list there. It takes it and now initializes it as row. Okay, now for each data list as row, post will take its center stage and equivalent the ID in the incoming to the outgoing, or you could call it LHS, RHS. So that ends the PDO connectivity. The next thing is the usual thing we learn, the HTML aspect or area, which is almost the similarity with the procedural one that uses PHP MySQL for SQL operations. So let's quickly run this and see how this would play in the browser. Simply click on the run and run on server, then OK. Alright, so now we are having one of our database sets, record sets. Assuming we were to just make a slight change here and call this, let's just put a number there, 5, and click on submit. Okay, you can see that now one SQL database updated. And what does this is simply this aspect here. Yeah, this aspect here, the else that follows the if update at the object, the PDO update, instance of the PDO update. And that's just about it. So here, let's just quickly look at how the change that we made has occurred. Of course, the previous name here is random, but we added 5 in the interface. Can we just refresh this now and see? Once we refresh, we see whether or not our script was successful. Okay, as you can see there now, we have random 5.
Finally, we're going to be looking at delete query, and it has this format: delete from table ID with the where condition applies. Then you also have delete asterisk. Asterisk is all, delete all from table ID, which of course, if you want to execute that, you must understand that it's going to wipe off everything from that specific table in question. Then for the PHP data updates, the new method of encapsulating and executing delete queries, you have variable names deleting from table ID, where row ID is equal to a specific ID. Okay, then you have SQL query variable that instantiates as a this object, which maps out to a PDO and takes a function prepare to
the variable query itself that requests the delete and then returns that particular function that requests that specific execution. For the delete query, we're going to make use of the existing connection that uses SQLi. Okay, this specific code, which is called connect SQL.php. And next to it, we design a certain script, very short script, doesn't take much lines as such. Now, the first thing is establishing a connection, of course, to the database. The second is actually declaring an ID specifically that is going to delete, okay, because this will help us specify the condition of where in the SQL statement. Now, in this particular area, several things occur. We interact the ID through the get superglobal array for tracking variable, and the get is also used to trap the yes incoming. This yes, this is the ID and the yes from the HTML form object. Then an if is set is utilized for the yes button. There's a form object that we use beneath here. This is it. This is the submit, but we use two. This is 1 and this is 2. So the first one houses the yes option and the second one houses the no option. So this specific section of the code handles the yes. Okay, that's to ask if you actually want to delete information from the database, whilst the second one handles the no. Okay, this is the no here. This particular aspect here is the no. The one following the if it said submit here is checking. This one is the check. This one checks if the delete query is successful. And take very close look at how the delete is done. You see delete, you initialize with a variable name called delete query. Then you use MySQLi with the argument method. Of course, the MySQLi query is the method that you have parameters or arguments within it. Two parameters actually, as you know. The connection string, which is this one here, that establishes connection using the host name, username, and the password variables, and then of course the delete statement itself in SQL, and the where clause. You should take note of that here. The where clause. This where clause is very, very important. And with that, you have your delete query. We're going to be seeing this in action very soon when we finally put together the control management system. Okay, so here finally we have the delete with PDO, and we're still using our connect SQL underscore PDO, or rather, I think we should be using the proper PDO. Let's see what this delete proper. Yeah, it should be proper PDO, not this. This specific one is not what we need. The one that we need is the PDO proper. Okay, and this proper PDO houses what we already know that I've all gone through. We're still using the same template for the connection using PDO. Then in the delete PDO, what change? Everything still remains likely the same, just like the MySQLi version. But the only thing that changes now is the way we perform the delete query. Alright, take for instance now, this is the delete query variable. Okay, and we're equivalenting it, we are mapping it, say prepare, we're equivalenting it to prepare method. Okay, delete from user base, where is the ID, this specific ID here, which is also applying or coming up in the form here. We place it as hidden, okay, so that there will be consistency when we're using the URL parameterization. URL parameterization is simply how you use variables in incoming variables, either from a database or anywhere else, to operate on your variables on script for specific tasks. We'll be talking more about that later. So here we now have the delete query itself. Okay, now the prepare actually handles the preparation of the SQL for execution, while of course, the same object or method, rather, the same variable now uses a bind parameter for the ID so that we know where the deletion is taking place or will take place. Then finally, we have the delete query executing the delete itself. Now, of course, the check, this one does the check, and then this one handles the no. If nothing happens and the user decides not to delete anymore, then the moment no button is clicked, it will redirect to this specific script. So this is just about all for deleting with PDO objects. I must, before we go, I should also mention here that in this aspect, it was previously written as this, and this is actually not how it was supposed to be. So I made a little bit of correction here. When you are calling on the prepare is supposed to have a precursor, that's the method itself, which is the con with respect to the instance of the PDO, and of course it's being mapped to this mapping, it's being mapped to the method, one of the methods. And please don't forget, this is lowercase, should be lowercase con. Okay, so let's just nicely put that there. Okay, that's the mouse just moving back and forth. So this is con, yeah, so it's prepared now, it's ready to run. So when we actually click on the button delete, then the delete should be executed, because the specific thing is that this section of the code is looking forward to the event button of yes, the get yes, the yes in the HTML here, which we have. Okay, the label here is yes, and then you have no here, you have yes here. So the moment yes is selected or clicked, then this will execute, this function will execute, and the delete will be carried out. Finally, we're going to design our control management system by linking up all that we have done so far. I'm talking about the insert, the select, the update, and the delete. Now, before I show you how to do that, we're going to create two separate listings. Now, this very first listing is called PHP SQL Select underscore list. This one, the first one is actually targeting my SQLi. Okay, and it's just the same as what we did previously. The only difference is that somewhere in this code, we included two extra columns, and the columns are the update and then the delete entry for the label. Now for the link to it, we also created a link, corresponding link for the update or modify, and of course the delete record, which is down here. And then the parameterization, the one I spoke about, is right here. Now take a very close look at this area of the code. You are going to see that there is something there that has been actually designed. Okay, now this is the update. This specific URL is linking to the get update. Okay, the get script, the update, the same update we did for the SQL and PDO, but they're separate anyway. But this one is for the SQLi. So right here in between, you will see that there's a question mark that links to the ID, and then equals a data set. This data set here, the same one that helps us display all these variables from the database, and this variable comes from the fetch, this MySQLi fetch array data. So we're actually passing one of the key columns, which of course is the ID, to the URL, such that when you click it, it will be specific to a record set, a complete record set, let's say a complete row from start to finish. That's what this does. So when we are passing it to the update URL, it's going to help us to modify whatever it is we want to modify. And if you want to delete as well, it will also help us delete specifically with a where clause. So if you are updating, you can update easily with a where clause as the condition, and if you are deleting, you can also delete easily with the where clause. Okay, now this is about for the SQL. There is something else that I need to show you. Over here I created some links. These links are actually to echo out all that we've done so far. For the okay, for instance, now this is the add data. This is to add data, a short link for adding data. Then this is for viewing data. This one is a select. Okay, as you can see here. While this is the insert query. The insert query handles the label for add data, whilst the PHP SQL select list handles the view data. So that's just what we did. Then let's flip over now on the flip side. Let's flip to the PDO. For the PDO, all we did was also add, or first of all, yes, we created links. These 3 links here. Yes, just about 2 links rather here. Okay, the first one also handles insert query for the PDO, add data with PDO. Then the second one is handling the select with PDO script and has a label view data with PDO right here. Now if you go down as well, 2 columns were added in the label, modify and remove, and each respectively maps out to these strings too, which is similar to what we did in the other side, the SQLi. So then let's now go to the browser and test. Okay, so this is the view for the MySQL control management system. As you can see, the label here is MySQLi based simple PHP control management system. And over here, up here, we just have 2 links for adding, then for viewing. This one returns this same URL here, while this one will initiate or call up our insert query script. So here is all the display. This displays everything we have in the database, everything. The serial number is still being generated by the n variable, the one we've been using throughout this tutorial. Then of course you have the full name, as you know, the username, then the password, then the address. Now we also have the update here. You can also delete. Now we're going to see our delete in action, the same delete we've done previously. Okay, so now first thing I want us to do is, okay, totally we have 9 records sets from start to finish. Let's assume we want to add one more data now to make it up to 10. You click on the add data. Okay, so once we click on the add data, this script launches out. Let's just put something. Let's say Facebook user. Let's make that first case Facebook user. Then the username, you could just put FB underscore U. Then the password, we can just place anything there. Then over here, let's just paste Santa Barbara, Los Angeles. Okay, CA. Okay, so assuming we just submit, let's submit this. Okay, so it says new record has been added to the SQL listing. All right, so we can go back there now and check if what we've added has been added is reflecting. All right, so this is it. Facebook user number 10, FTE, and this Santa Barbara. You see that now. All right, so our add is working. That's the insert. Now let's see if our update is working. Let's try to update this information here. Of course, we can change it to a real name now. Let's say Thomas Jefferson. Okay, I think let's
Jefferson. Okay, right there. So, and then let's say we update. We try and update now. Submit. Okay, so you see that now it says SQL database updated. Click here to return. So let's see that we've changed the last name down to Jefferson. So this is it, Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson. So our update is definitely working. The update script we designed so far is working 100%. Then let's try and delete record. Okay, let's assume we want to delete Dixon driver. Let's delete. If you recall, in our design we need two submit buttons. Okay, yes and no. The yes handles the event for yes we want to delete. The no says return us back to the URL. Let's click no and see what happens first. Okay, so it returns us back to our script. So it has returned us back to the list, and the list in question is the initial list that shows everything we have in the database. Now let's assume we want to actually delete now. Instead of clicking no, we want to click yes. So let's click yes and see what happens. Okay, this is what happens. It says record deleted, return to the SQL data listing. Alright, so and it exactly does that. So you can see now the record has reduced by 1. Now we have 9. We have 9. We initially had 10, now we have 9. So far so good. Our select, our insert, our update, and our delete is working perfectly. Alright, in this section now, let's just focus on the PDO version for the scripts. And in order to do that, we're going to be running the major script too. There's a major script that handles all the PDO based scripts. And then, of course, let's have a better view. That's better to give us an overview of everything. Now we have, at the moment, we have about 10 records, as you can see here, up to this level in the database. And we're going to be testing each of these buttons to see how they work, the links. Let's try by adding a single data, okay, and call this Matthew Lincoln. Then the username, you could just call this MT 2020 2020, and then the password you could just give a random, and then the address is just random. You could just give it London Avenue, UK. Then you submit. Now the moment you submit, a new record is inserted, and we can actually return back to the listing. This is the listing, and the listing is PDO. So our new record has been inserted. We have Matthew Lincoln here, which is making the 11th row. Now let's try and update, modify the information here. Okay, as we wanted to add just AB to the username, and we click on submit button, the event, okay, tells us that my SQL database is updated. It shows that it is working. Okay, so the next thing we want to do here, or to try here, is the delete. Let's try the delete and see what happens. If we say we don't want to delete, it returns us back to the listing, the original listing. Okay, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. And if we say we wanted to actually delete, then we click on yes. Alright, so it has deleted, and we are back to the listing. You see now there's no 11th row again, it just terminates at 10. Now for the parameterization, the one I mentioned earlier, if you look at these links, you see that they all come with, okay, let's test this. You see the link comes with the ID, indicating that this is the ID that is being called from the database, and that has to be modified here. Without this,
we're going to be having jargons or some other things that it's not meant to. Okay, so parameterization or parameterization, what it does simply is that it helps to, make database constants, help to modify specific conditions or areas that need either modification or deletion or whatever it is you want to do. You could want to use the variable to store some other variable or to perform other tasks. So URL parameterization is actually the basis of most of these application programming interfaces you see around all over the internet. And they help because the moment you register with a specific program or a framework, it could be an API service, maybe a cloud service or something, all the hosts will need to do is that they're going to assign to you an encrypted number that will be stored in the database. So when you come to access the resources, the parameterization will be encrypted back and forth as you request for information or resources. So the moment it authenticates, it's a two-sided thing. The moment it authenticates, then it will give you access to everything you want. A lot of applications, software applications, use this type of application programming interface. This is very, very common. Google uses it, IBM, name them the big giants, Facebook, the likes. They use a lot of this technique in actually, delivering software utilities. So that's just what parameterization is about. And also help. Look at this. If you want to delete, now we are going to delete based on this ID 21. And this ID 21 is the record in the database that holds the specific record we are trying to delete. Okay, as you can see here, it's 21. And Thomas Jefferson, if you go to the database and you refresh, you see that you see Thomas Jefferson is having ID of 21. So whatever we are doing here, since this is the primary key, it is this particular row, this particular column that is handling every other thing. Every other thing is circling around the primary key. So this is just about all about how you can construct a practical management system. Now in the next video, we're going to be doing lots of it. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you can do this within 1 hour or 2 hours, great. Then you can move on. You're still going to do a lot of things like validation, using jQuery, using the Ajax, Node.js, building classes. Now we're going to go into much more difficult aspects, much more advanced. It's not going to be difficult, but all you need to do is just pay attention, learn, create time to program and write your scripts, and prune them for perfection.